This is an overview of the collar chapter. It would be included in any quiz information that I send out. When you sew a collar in, the first thing you do is have the dart already sewn in to the back shoulder, and then sew the front and back shoulder together. And once those are together, then you can sew the collar into the neckline. And for the rest of the collar assignment, I'm going to keep my back shoulder seam together, and I've just temporarily moved the dart to the armhole. I find it easier to work with that way. You can either make a separate one or just temporarily move yours as well. This shows you the basic elements of a collar. I'm going to start with this page though, and we'll come back to that. So these are your basic collar types. This one is like what you sometimes see on little girls' dresses, commonly called a Bertha collar, where it just lays flat, almost like a bib. And the neckline is very curved, and it just sews into the neckline and lays flat. But the circumference of that, if it was the same size, as in not a child size but adult size, this neckline would be the same length as this one. But this one, if this were the neck, a Bertha collar would sit around the neck more this way so that it lays flat. And a mandarin collar, for example, is straight and sometimes even curving upward in relationship to the neck. But this line and this line are both the same length. And I'll continue with that, but that's the mental picture. So a collar that lays down and is against the body is not as straight. And this one is showing a collar that's partially rolling upward, and this one is, this part of the collar is sewn into the neck and then it rolls up and comes back down. And this is the design edge, and the neckline edge is hidden inside. So the basic parts of a collar, this would be the neckline edge that sews into the body, the neckline that we just looked at. So that edge would sew in to those two pieces on the curve right here. This curve is where this neckline sews into. I mean, it would if they were the same size as each other. I guess I need to get visual aids that are all the same size. But this neckline edge would sew in to the neckline of the body, neckline of the collar. Then on the collar, this part is the stand in the picture that we were looking at before. And I'll darken that up a little bit. This is all the same piece of fabric. This is like your Hawaiian shirt collar. And then it would fold on this line, and this would be what is called the fall. So you've got the stand and the fall. And the outer edge, this is the design edge. This edge changes length and shape between different collar styles. This line changes shape, but the length always stays the same because it always has to fit in to the neckline. Now, if we were to make a sailor collar, then we would change the neckline of the body and get rid of that so that we would have a sailor collar, but it would have to match. Then the sailor collar neckline would be matching the body. So most of the collars that we're going to be working on will just have a standard neck. So they're all going to have the same length of neckline edge to sew into the body. The design edge on all of these can change. It isn't a fit thing. So you can pretty much make them look the way you want to on the outer edge, as long as the shape and the curve and the length all fit the neckline in the way that it needs to for it to hang the way you're wanting it to hang. So to come back to this idea, this is rolling up and falling down, so the roll line is very short on this one. So it would just be clear down here. The roll line wouldn't be as high. This one, the roll line is up here, and you've got almost an equal distance where the stand and then the fall comes down just enough to cover the stand part of the collar. But this one would be a Hawaiian shirt type of convertible collar. And this one would be more of a schoolgirl lay flat against the body type of collar. This one, the neckline is a lot more curved, where this one, the neckline is a lot more flat. So when you're looking at it, as this part sews into the neckline, that's what causes it to stand up. And this one, when this part is sewing into the neck, that's what keeps it much flatter. There's another example. So with these three collars, this one's laying flat, more like the Bertha collar did, and a little bit more it's raising and raising. So the flatter it's laying, the more curved the neckline is, and the more it's standing up against the neck, the less curve it has. Alright, so we're going to go over a group of different collars, but I'm going to one at a time. But right now, I'm going to do several quickly, just so that you can see them. Okay, this is a different book. This book is by Nora MacDonald, and it actually shows the different ones sitting on top of each other. I may pass out some of her pages of collars, and that can be an advertisement for her book if you're interested. I don't want to plagiarize her book. I like her a lot. Just flip through this one in case you're interested. This one has a glossary at the back. It has flare, break point, seam line, flare, sweep. It just talks about a lot of different things. But so does the other book. All the books are very similar. It's just each of them has something that's a little nicer than the others. This one I think of as being a little bit more simplified, but it's still very similar. And that's Nora MacDonald. All of the versions are good though, so. Okay. So coming back to collars. Instead of having a basic pattern piece for a collar, you use the basic front and back together. Now this first one that I'm going to do is going to be wrong, but it shows the concept behind the way they fit together. You would start by putting your pieces together on the shoulder seam. So I'm doing this one in red. It's not the way you'd want to do it. And you'd make sure that you're lining it up exactly, particularly, oh, zoom in. So I traced just the upper part of the back, and now I'm going to trace the upper part of the front. And I want to make sure that the neckline is a continuous line. And logically, you would just put them together and that would be your neckline. If you were doing just a Bertha collar, like on a little girl's dress, you might come down and you'd have it open in the back, and the collar would come around and do something like that. So that neckline is very curved, and you'd put a notch on your collar, and maybe there would be an extension and it would button down the back or have a zipper. But this is where the center back would be, and this is the center front, and this would be on the fold. The front would be on the all right. So this might be what your collar would look like. This is the most curved it could possibly be, but you find that if you have a collar like this and you don't take out some of the ease and you put it on the dress form and it's all sewn together, this collar is going to have extra right there, and it will be kind of ripply the way it lays on the body because it's exactly the same shape as the neckline, and that doesn't work as well. So typically what will happen instead, you won't put it together exactly, you would overlap the front and the back just enough that it would take out, pre-pinch out that amount right there. So you would subtract on a full scale thing at least a ½ an inch. So the minimum of overlap that you would put right here would be at least a ½ an inch. Since we're doing half scale, it will be a 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to mark. This has to stay exactly the same. This is your pivot point right here, because you need to keep your neckline the same. But I would put a little mark here of an overlap, full scale a ½ an inch, half scale a 1/4 of an inch. And so I'm going to line this up exactly right here. And I'm going to overlap it out here at the end a 1/4 of an inch. So that means my collar shape, my neckline shape, my shoulder is still going to be the same length, but my finished collar is going to have less curve by that much. And it doesn't matter whether I do that on the front or the back. It's going to end up to be the same shape, but it overlaps a minimum of a 1/2 inch. That would be on the test, the minimum. Well, that's just, we'll have to go back to the red pen. So the minimum amount of overlap, full scale, is always going to be no less than a 1/2 inch, or it won't hang right. It will come up and move around and flutter. If you want to do that on purpose, then maybe that would be appropriate, but for a nice looking traditional collar, you would want to overlap it that amount. As soon as I hear myself making generalities, I find that I can always think of an exception to the rule. Okay, so that's your first collar. Then a collar that has a stand and a fall, they get progressively more overlapped. So if we were going to do a collar that like the ones in the book, that you've got your neckline in here and the collar climbs the neck a little bit, and it's going to climb the neck and blend back in down here, but then it'll have a fall that comes down. So it's standing up against the body higher on the neckline. That one is going to overlap 4 inches. So 1/2 scale, if I were to recreate that, I would need to put a mark out here at 2 inches. And those are the two extremes. So I still need to line this up on that point. And I would rotate it around until I bump into that line. And because I'm going to give myself a little helper line there. So as I rotate it around, that's where it would bump if it were wide enough. So for this one, need another color. Our back is going to be over here because our shoulder is overlapping. So this one, our notch would be here, but you can't have a point like that, so I would use my curve and blend that. And I'd need to make sure that my measurement from here to here was equal to my neckline. But you can see how the collars are changing shape. And if I were to do a mandarin collar, have to have another color again. If I were doing a mandarin collar, I probably wouldn't make it as wide. It would actually be straight. So I would measure that distance right there and that distance and bring it out. So if I got my center front neck, right now I'm walking it. It would probably be better if I measured it. But 1/2 scale, sometimes measuring, I break rulers doing that. So my notch would be here, not here, And on my back neck, it would join right there. And this would be my length. So when you're in the collar chapter, apparently these are drying out. A mandarin collar, there are variations of it, but you would start it with a straight collar, and your notch is still going to match. At the point that it overlaps 4 inches, you saw how difficult that was to figure out. Then you just start from your mandarin collar. And in addition to just being straight, quite often they'll bump up a little bit. They'll still be at a right angle there at the center back. But that gives you an idea of the differences between the collars. So I should use my curtain. Look a lot better if I use my curtain. So on a really fitted collar, that could actually come up even more. So the difference between the necklines, I'll draw your mandarin collar. I keep just getting smaller and smaller, don't I? A mandarin collar, this would be the neckline, and the collar would sit up here, wrap around the body, but it would be more straight. And a collar that's sitting that high on the neck is going to have a very straight neckline edge. So this part all sews in to the neckline of the body, and this part sews into the neckline of the body. So what you're supposed to be getting out of this is that the neckline edges stay the same length, but they change shape, and the design edges change length and change shape. The neckline edge, the length stays the same, changes shape. The design edge changes both shape and length in order to create the fit that you want. This is exactly the same thing, only with the back holding still and the front moving. It works exactly the same way. But I kind of like it a little bit better, the way it looks. So if it confuses you to have both explanations, just ignore this one or the other one, but they turn out the same. So instead of having them just touch, I'm going to measure back 1/4 of an inch, and while I'm here I'm also going to measure back an inch, and I'm tapering from there. I'm measuring back an inch, and I'm going to measure back 1 more inch. Yeah, that's even going to work better. Okay, so my basic collar that lays flat on the shoulders, if I move the front, is going to sit right there. So I have that amount of overlap that I've taken out. It's like pinching out a dart. And that's the minimum amount of overlap that you need. That's my 1/2 inch full scale. And then if I were to do this again, in fact, I think, so that color could be a little Peter Pan color that just comes around. And the next one would be a similar Peter Pan color, but it would overlap more. And so it's going to lay differently. So that one would look more like this. But keep in mind that either collar, if you wanted to, you could make it be pointy or whatever shape you want it to be, because that's the design edge, but this is the fit edge. The neckline edge is the fit edge. So right here on this one, I need to blend that smooth. So I would just be blending out that little bit, but my notch is always going to be right there where the shoulder seam is. And then on this one, the one that would be the 4-inch overlap full scale, this would be my front neckline edge, and that same color would wrap around over here. And I would need to do that same blending right here. And I would still have my notch in the same place. So all 3 of those colors are going to fit differently, but the neckline edges are all part of the fit. And so they all have to fit the neck, and so they're all equal. And the design edge gets a little bit smaller on each of those collars. And I could make them whatever length I wanted, or scalloped, or whatever. And if I got to the mandarin collar, then I would measure it so it's the same length. And that length on the back happens to be 1 3/4. So my notch would go right there, and the length of the front neck is 2 1/2. So I would extend that out another 2 1/2 inches. The mandarin collar is usually narrower. So this neckline is also equal, but it gets shorter and shorter as it stands up higher. The design edge shortens. And it changes shape so that it fits the way you want it to. And on the flattest one, it's the blue amount of overlap. Oh, that's my little dog, Ginger. She wants to go outside, it sounds like. And then on the widest one, this is the amount of overlap, only it continues all the way around to, you know, it's progressive. And by the time you get to a mandarin, you really can't do it that way anymore. And this is the center back. So I like the way it looks better, but it turns out the same way, either way that you do it. And that confuses people, so I just like to warn you. But either way is going to work. You still overlap at the same amount. those are the 4 colors together cut out. I had to turn this one over because the neckline edge is curving the opposite way. So you've got your mandarin collar, your flat collar, your full roll collar, and you can see how the neckline changes. And then this one that stands up, the mandarin, I folded under so it relates to the rest of them. And it's got its little notch right here, and it curves the other direction. So the thing they all have in common is the length that sews into the neck, and the design edges are all different, and that's what causes them to hang differently.